Before there were words for alone, before there were names for together, before the human mind knew how to explain what it felt, there was a moment that changed everything. Not a moment written in stone, not a moment remembered by history, a moment that left no tools behind, no bones marked differently, no fire pit that archaeologists could ever point to and say, "Here it began." And yet it happened. Tonight we return to that moment, not to witness a great hunt, not to see the first fire, not to hear the first word, but to feel something quieter, something invisible, something that would one day shape every story, every song, every longing heart. Tonight we search for the first human to ever feel loneliness. For almost all of human existence, loneliness did not exist in the way we know it now. Early humans lived not as individuals, but as parts of a living whole. They woke to the sound of others breathing. They fell asleep surrounded by warmth, by movement, by the quiet reassurance of presence. From the moment a child opened their eyes, there were faces, there were hands, there were voices. To be human was to be with. The world was dangerous, unpredictable, and vast, and the only defense against it was closeness. Groups moved together, they ate together, they rested together. If someone wandered too far, fear followed quickly, not emotional fear, but physical terror. A lone human was vulnerable. Teeth, claws, cold, darkness. So evolution shaped the human mind to seek others constantly. Eyes scanned not just for threats, but for companions. Ears listened not only for danger, but for familiar sounds. In this world, being alone was rare and brief. There was no space yet for loneliness to grow. Loneliness requires more than isolation. It requires awareness. An animal can be alone without feeling lonely. A creature can be separated without missing. Loneliness begins only when the mind understands that something should be there and is not. This understanding took time to evolve. Early humans lived in the present moment. Hunger meant food, cold meant shelter, threat meant escape. There was little reflection, little memory layered with emotion, but slowly, so slowly that no single generation noticed, the human mind changed, memory deepened, imagination expanded. The mind began to hold images of others even when they were not present. And when that happened, the possibility of loneliness was born. Imagine a time far beyond written history. No calendars, no dates, only seasons and movement. The land is wide and open. Grass stretches to the horizon. Trees stand scattered like silent witnesses. A small group moves through this landscape. They are not aware of themselves as a group. They simply are. They follow animals. They follow water. They follow instinct. Among them is one human, no different from the others in strength or skill. Not a leader, not an outcast, just one of many. Until for a brief moment they are not. It does not happen dramatically. There is no chase, no attack, no sudden disaster. Perhaps the group pauses to gather food. Perhaps a child lingers. Perhaps the wind shifts, carrying sounds away. Perhaps fog drifts in quietly, wrapping the land in silence. The human looks up, and something is different. The sounds have changed. The rhythm of movement, once constant, is gone. No footsteps nearby. No murmured calls, no shared breathing. At first, the body reacts as it always has. Heart quickens, muscles tense, eyes search. This is normal, this is survival, but then something new emerges. The human does not only scan the land, they listen. And in that listening, the mind reaches outward and finds nothing. The absence itself becomes noticeable. The quiet feels empty, not just dangerous, empty. The human realizes, perhaps not in words, but in sensation, that others exist and are not here. This realization is subtle. It does not arrive with panic. It arrives as a hollow space, a pause in the mind. For the first time, the human is not simply reacting to the environment, they are reflecting on it. This is where loneliness begins, not with fear, but with recognition. The recognition that companionship is missing, the recognition that presence can be absent. The human stands still longer than necessary. The body could move, the feet could walk, but the mind lingers. Search is not for predators, but for familiarity. A shape, a sound, anything known, nothing answers. In earlier generations, this moment would have ended quickly. The human would have followed tracks, called out, moved without thought, but something has changed in this mind. Memory surfaces, images of others, faces, movements, gestures flicker faintly. Not clear pictures, but impressions, and with them comes a new sensation, a tightening in the chest, a weight that is not hunger, a discomfort that is not pain. This is not instinct, this is emotion. Loneliness is often described as sadness, but sadness comes later. This first loneliness is simpler. It is the feeling of being incomplete, as if something essential has been misplaced. The human does not know why this feels wrong, only that it does. The world suddenly feels larger than before. The sky higher, the land wider, the silence heavier. Without others, the human feels smaller, more fragile, more aware. Time stretches. Minutes feel longer than usual. The mind fills the quiet with imagined sounds. Every rustle could be footsteps. Every movement of grass could be the group returning. Hope flickers, then fades, and with each fading the feeling deepens. This is not panic, this is longing, the first longing ever felt by a human. Loneliness is not weakness, it is not failure. It is the mind doing something extraordinary. It is recognizing connection as essential. This emotion will one day drive humans to build villages, then cities. To create families, tribes, nations. It will inspire art, songs, stories whispered in the dark. But here now it is raw and unnamed. The human does not understand it, they only feel it. As light begins to change, the human realizes another truth. Night is coming, and night is different when you are alone. Sounds grow sharper, shadows deepen. The absence of others becomes more pronounced. The human begins to move, not quickly, cautiously. Each step feels heavier than before, not because of fatigue, but because the mind is now divided. Part of it watches the world, another part watches itself. This division, this inner awareness is new, and it is uncomfortable. As the human walks, memory continues to surface, not memories of events, but of presence, the closeness of others while sleeping, the warmth of shared fires, the rhythm of breathing in the dark. These memories are not detailed, but they carry emotion, and that emotion has nowhere to go. It circles inward, deepening the loneliness. Eventually, the human stops. The light is fading fast. It is safer to wait, to listen, to hope. The ground is cool, the air still. The human crouches, hugging knees close. This posture is not planned, it is instinctive, a way to make the body smaller, safer, but the mind does not quiet. It listens outward and inward, and in that inward listening, the human feels something entirely new, not just the absence of others, but the awareness of self. I am here. The thought is not verbal, but it is clear, and with it comes another realization. I am alone. This realization marks a turning point in human consciousness. For the first time, a human experiences themselves as separate, as an individual, not just part of a moving whole. Loneliness and self-awareness are born together. You cannot have one without the other. The stars begin to appear, cold settles in. The human waits, listening, hoping. And as the night deepens, the feeling remains, quiet, persistent, unresolved. The night does not arrive all at once. It seeps in slowly, like water filling a hollow. At first, the human barely notices the change. The sky dims, colors soften, edges blur, then the sounds shift. Daytime noises, distant movement, subtle life fade away. In their place come sharper, more isolated sounds, a rustle here, a snap of twig there, the faint call of something unseen. Each sound exists alone, separated by silence. The human listens carefully. In the past, silence meant rest. Now silence feels different. It presses inward. The body stays alert. Muscles remain tense. Breathing slows but does not settle. The human's eyes move constantly, tracing shapes in the dimming light. Every shadow feels unfinished, incomplete. The mind tries to predict what comes next, but without others nearby, prediction feels harder. There is no shared awareness, no unspoken agreement that someone else is watching the dark. The responsibility feels heavier, and beneath that weight, loneliness grows. Loneliness does not announce itself. It does not arrive like fear, sudden and sharp. It spreads gradually like cold through uncovered skin. At first, it is just discomfort, a subtle sense that something is not right, then it becomes a presence of its own. A quiet companion sitting beside the human in the dark. The human shifts position. The ground is uneven, unfamiliar. In the past, settling down for the night happened among others. There was a rhythm to it. Someone always stayed awake longer. Someone always stirred during the night. The human never had to hold the entire darkness alone. Now every sound feels personal, every possibility feels closer. The mind begins to wander, not in words, not in stories, but in impressions. Images rise without invitation. Faces vague, undefined of others from the group, not distinct features, but shapes and movements, a remembered posture, a familiar silhouette. The human feels something tighten again in the chest. The mind is doing something new. It is missing. Missing is different from fear. Fear looks forward. It anticipates danger. Missing looks backward. It pulls the mind toward what is no longer present. This backward pull creates tension. The human is torn between watching the dark and reaching inward toward memory. This division is exhausting. The body wants to rest. The mind refuses. Above, the stars multiply. The sky becomes crowded with light. The human has seen stars before many times, but never like this, never alone. Without voices nearby, the stars feel closer. Larger, more numerous, they stretch endlessly in all directions. The human feels small beneath them, not insignificantly small, but individually small, a single presence in a vast space. This feeling is new. In earlier times, the human was small only as part of a group. Now the smallness belongs to the self alone. The awareness of self sharpens. I am here. The sensation repeats quietly. I am here and no one else is. Loneliness deepens when the human realizes something else. No one else knows where they are. If danger comes, if injury happens, if the night grows too cold, there is no immediate help. This knowledge does not cause panic, it causes heaviness. A sinking realization. The human feels exposed, not just physically, existentially. Time behaves strangely, moments stretch. The human counts nothing. There is no concept of hours, only waiting, listening, breathing. The loneliness does not fade. It settles in, steady and persistent, not overwhelming, but unmistakable. Eventually, fatigue begins to win. The body demands rest. Eyes grow heavy, but sleep feels risky. Every instinct resists closing them. In a group, sleep was shared. One person's rest relied on another's vigilance. Now the human must choose, stay awake and weaken slowly, or sleep and trust the darkness. The human compromises, eyes close briefly, then open again, close, open. Each time they close, images return. The group walking earlier that day, the subtle rhythm of movement. The mind replays these fragments as if hoping they will summon reality back. They do not. Each time the eyes open, the human feels the loss again. Loneliness sharpens with repetition. At some point, exhaustion overtakes caution. The human curls tighter, arms wrap around knees. This posture feels protective, contained. It reduces the body's outline. It also brings a strange comfort. The human is holding themselves. This, too, is new. As sleep finally approaches, it does not come smoothly. Dreams and waking blur together. The human drifts, then startles awake. Each time the same realization returns. I am alone. The phrase is not spoken, but it is understood. In this half-sleep state, something remarkable happens. The human's mind begins to imagine being found, footsteps approaching, a familiar call, a shape emerging from the darkness. This imagined reunion brings a brief warmth, a soft easing of the tightness inside. The mind discovers that imagining others can relieve loneliness, even if only for a moment. This discovery will echo through all of human history. The imagination grows stronger. It begins to fill the absence, not accurately, not logically, but emotionally. The human's mind is learning that it can create comfort internally when external comfort is missing. This is the beginning of inner companionship, the beginning of stories. The night continues, cold creeps in, the human shivers. Without shared body heat, the chill feels sharper. The human adjusts, presses limbs closer together. Every movement is cautious. Listening follows each shift, still nothing. At some point, a distant sound breaks the silence. It is faint, indistinct. The human freezes, heart quickens. Is it movement? Is it danger? The sound does not repeat. Silence returns, but the loneliness reacts differently this time. Hope flickers. The possibility of others feels real again, and with hope comes vulnerability. If hope fades, loneliness grows stronger. The human waits, listening harder now. Every sense is stretched outward. Minutes pass, no sound returns. Hope dims, and loneliness presses deeper than before. This cycle, hope and disappointment, etches itself into the human emotional system. Future humans will feel it too, waiting for messages, waiting for footsteps, waiting for voices that do not come. Eventually, the human's awareness narrows. Fatigue claims more ground. The mind slips into deeper sleep. Not restful, but necessary. Dreams come in fragments, images of togetherness, movement, warmth. The dreams are not clear, but they are comforting. For a time, loneliness recedes, then morning approaches. The sky lightens gradually, cold air softens, bird calls begin, subtle at first, then more frequent. The human stirs, eyes open slowly. For a brief moment, confusion, then memory returns. The night, the silence, the loneliness, but something has changed. The loneliness is still there. But it feels different, less sharp, more familiar. The human has survived it, endured it. This endurance matters. The mind has learned that loneliness does not kill, it hurts, but it can be carried. The human stands, stretches stiff limbs. The body feels weaker than usual, slower but alive. The light reveals the landscape again. Familiar shapes return. The world feels less threatening in daylight, but the memory of the night lingers. The human listens again, this time not with desperation. With patience, a distant sound reaches the ears. Faint but real movement, voices, the group, relief floods the body. Muscles loosen, breathing deepens. The loneliness begins to dissolve, but it does not disappear entirely. Something of it remains, a residue, a memory. When the human rejoins the group, there is no celebration, no explanation, no recounting of feelings. None of that exists yet. There is only closeness, movement together, shared direction. But inside the human, something is permanently altered. Even surrounded by others, the human now understands absence, understands separation, understands that togetherness is not guaranteed. This understanding adds depth to connection, makes presence feel richer, more valuable. Loneliness has done its work. It has taught the human mind what connection means. It has carved out an inner space where reflection can grow, where imagination can form, where stories will one day live. The group moves on, life continues, but the human carries something invisible now. A quiet knowledge that being with others matters, that being alone changes something inside. This experience will not remain unique. Others will feel it again and again across generations as humans migrate farther, as groups split, as individuals wander. Loneliness will follow, shaping minds, shaping culture, shaping the human story. But for now it rests quietly within this one human, unspoken, unnamed. Yet profoundly human, the first loneliness has been felt, and humanity has crossed another invisible threshold. The days that follow do not announce themselves as important, and nothing in the movement of the sun or the rhythm of walking suggests that anything fundamental has shifted. And yet within the quiet architecture of the human mind, something irreversible has already taken root, something that cannot be removed, only carried forward, folded invisibly into every future moment of awareness, altering how presence is felt, how absence is remembered, and how connection will forever after be understood. The human walks with the group again, surrounded by motion, by sound, by the subtle, unspoken coordination that keeps bodies aligned and moving in the same direction, and outwardly nothing appears different because the body remembers how to belong without effort, how to match pace, how to fall into the shared rhythm of survival that has guided countless generations before this one. But inwardly, something lingers. The mind now holds a memory that does not fade easily, a memory not of danger narrowly escaped or hunger endured, but of emptiness itself, of a silence that was not merely quiet but vacant, a silence that carried meaning precisely because it contained nothing familiar, nothing responsive, nothing alive in the way that other humans are alive to one another. As the group moves, the human occasionally glances outward, not searching for threats, not scanning for prey, but unconsciously confirming presence, confirming that others are still there, that the shared field of awareness still exists, that the world has not slipped back into that vast, hollow quiet where the self stood alone beneath an indifferent sky. This checking is subtle, almost invisible, but it is constant. The mind has learned that togetherness is not permanent, and that knowledge changes everything. Loneliness does not vanish simply because others are near. Instead, it transforms, settling deeper into the mind as a reference point, a comparison against which all future closeness will be measured, giving weight and texture to presence, making shared moments feel fuller, warmer, more fragile precisely because they are now known to be temporary. Before this moment in human history, connection was instinctive but unexamined, like breathing or walking, something that happened without reflection, without appreciation, without the quiet awareness that it could be lost. Now, connection has contrast. Now, being together is something that can be remembered even when it is absent, and that is the beginning of meaning. As days pass, the human's inner world grows more active, not louder, not more chaotic, but deeper, layered with impressions that linger longer than before, impressions that return uninvited during moments of rest, during pauses in movement, during the quiet stretches when nothing demands immediate attention. Faces come back in the mind, still indistinct, still without names, but emotionally present in a way they were not before, carrying a warmth that feels earned rather than automatic, as if the mind is now capable of holding others inside itself, not merely reacting to their physical presence but preserving them internally. This internal holding is new. It is the beginning of emotional continuity, and loneliness is its shadow. Because to hold others inside the mind is to know implicitly that they can be absent, that the internal image may sometimes be all that remains, and that this image, however comforting, is not the same as real closeness, not the same as shared breath, shared warmth, shared awareness in the dark. The human does not think these thoughts in language. There are no words for them yet. But the feelings themselves are coherent, structured, persistent, forming the earliest architecture of inner life, the foundation upon which all later reflection, all later storytelling, all later longing will be built. Loneliness begins to influence behavior in small ways. The human lingers slightly closer to others during rest, stays within clearer sight during movement, responds more quickly to sounds that suggest separation. None of this is conscious. It is emotional gravity at work, gently pulling the human toward proximity, toward reassurance, toward the subtle confirmation that they are still part of something larger than themselves. This emotional gravity strengthens bonds. It makes separation feel costly. And in doing so, it reshapes the structure of human groups. Because when loneliness exists, groups no longer function only as survival units. They become emotional anchors, places of belonging, spaces where the self feels complete. This shift will one day lead to rituals, to shared stories, to symbols of unity, but here now it begins simply as a quiet preference for closeness, a subtle resistance to drifting too far, a deepening of attachment that did not exist before. As nights pass, the human sleeps differently, still surrounded by others, still protected by shared vigilance, but now the darkness carries memory. The mind remembers what night was like alone, and that memory adds texture to the present moment. The sound of breathing nearby becomes more noticeable, the warmth of bodies more comforting, the faint movements in the dark more reassuring. Sleep deepens, not because danger has lessened, but because connection is now consciously felt. Loneliness has taught the human to value presence, and value transforms experience. This transformation does not remain confined to one individual. Others in the group experience separation in their own ways, at their own times, as migration continues, as terrain changes, as visibility shifts, as accidents happen, as life unfolds with its inherent unpredictability. And when they do, something resonates, because the human mind, once capable of loneliness, becomes capable of recognizing it in others. This recognition is not empathetic in the modern sense. It is not articulated, but it is real. A subtle awareness that another's withdrawal, another's silence, another's closeness carries emotional meaning, not just practical consequence. Loneliness becomes shared knowledge, unspoken but understood, and shared knowledge is the root of culture. Over generations, this emotional capacity spreads, not genetically in the strict sense, but developmentally, as minds shaped by loneliness raise children whose inner worlds are richer, more reflective, more attuned to absence and presence alike. Children begin to notice when caregivers leave, not just as disruption, but as loss. And when caregivers return, reunion feels meaningful, emotionally charged, comforting in a way that exceeds mere safety. This cycle reinforces attachment, deepens bonds, strengthens social cohesion. Loneliness, once born, begins to weave itself into the fabric of human life. It becomes a quiet teacher, teaching the mind what matters, teaching the heart where it belongs. Teaching the self that it exists not in isolation, but in relation. As humans migrate farther from their origins, spreading across landscapes that grow colder, harsher, more fragmented, loneliness follows them, sometimes intensifying, sometimes easing, but always present as a potential, always waiting just beyond the edge of togetherness, ready to remind the mind of what it values most. Long journeys increase separation. Separation increases memory. Memory deepens emotion. And emotion demands expression. At first, expression is physical, closer sitting, shared movement, synchronized rest. Later, it becomes vocal, calls meant not just to locate but to reassure, sounds that say, "I am here." Sounds that answer, "You are not alone." These calls are the ancestors of language, not informational at first, relational. They exist to bridge distance, to soothe loneliness, to maintain connection across space and darkness. As the human mind grows more capable of holding images, of replaying experiences, of imagining futures, loneliness becomes more complex. It is no longer only the feeling of being physically alone. It becomes the feeling of being emotionally unseen, of being present but not fully connected. This complexity will take tens of thousands of years to fully unfold, but its roots are here, in this first awareness that connection can be absent even when the world continues, even when the body survives, even when the sun rises as it always has. Loneliness introduces the idea that survival is not enough, that being alive is not the same as being fulfilled. That something essential exists between humans, something intangible but vital, something that when missing leaves an ache no amount of food or shelter can fully resolve. This realization is profound. It changes the trajectory of the species, because a creature that values connection beyond survival will organize its world differently. It will protect the vulnerable. It will mourn the dead. It will remember the absent. It will create meaning where none is strictly necessary for survival. Loneliness drives all of this, not loudly, not forcefully, but persistently, like a low, steady current shaping the course of a river over time. The human who first felt loneliness does not know any of this. They do not know that their quiet night alone beneath the stars has shifted the future. They simply live, walk, eat, rest, connect, but inside them the emotional landscape of humanity has expanded. A new dimension has been added, one that allows for longing, for attachment, for loss. And eventually for love, because love is impossible without the knowledge of absence, without the fear of separation, without the ache that loneliness leaves behind. Love is the answer loneliness teaches the mind to seek. And so, even now in this early chapter of human awareness, the seeds of every future relationship are being quietly planted, watered by memory, shaped by imagination, and held together by the fragile, powerful knowledge that being with others is not guaranteed and therefore must be cherished. As the group moves onward through the landscape, unaware of the invisible threshold they have crossed, the human story continues to unfold, richer now, deeper now, more complex than before, carrying within it a feeling that will echo across millennia, through villages and cities, through families and friendships, through nights filled with voices and nights spent alone, always reminding the human heart of where it came from and what it longs to return to. As time continues its unmeasured passage, flowing forward without names or numbers or markers that could later be pointed to and labeled as beginnings or endings, loneliness does not remain a single experience held by one mind alone, but becomes a quiet inheritance, passed not through blood or bone but through awareness itself, carried forward as each new human mind opens to the world already shaped by generations before it, generations who have learned without ever speaking it. That being human means being connected, and that connection, once known, can be lost. The human group moves through the land as it always has, following water, following animals, following the slow logic of survival written into muscle and instinct. Yet beneath this familiar pattern something subtle is changing, because the humans within the group are no longer merely reacting to one another's presence, but beginning, however faintly, to anticipate absence, to sense the possibility of separation even while standing shoulder to shoulder, even while moving together under the same open sky. This anticipation alters behavior in ways so small they would be invisible to any observer if there were one, which there is not. But inside the mind these changes are unmistakable, because anticipation creates tension, and tension creates awareness, and awareness creates meaning where once there was only function. A human pauses slightly longer before moving away from the group to gather food, feeling an undefined resistance that did not exist before, a hesitation that cannot be explained by danger or fatigue, but arises from a deeper layer of experience, from the memory of what it felt like to be alone without choosing it, to be surrounded by space that offered no response, no reflection, no reassurance. Another human listens more carefully for familiar sounds at night, not because the darkness has grown more threatening, but because silence has acquired emotional weight, because silence is no longer empty but suggestive, capable of carrying memory, capable of awakening that quiet ache that loneliness left behind. These behaviors reinforce one another. As humans stay closer, separation becomes rarer, and when it does occur, it is felt more strongly, not only by the one who is separated, but by those who remain behind, who experience a faint disturbance in the shared field of awareness, a sense that something is missing even if they cannot articulate what it is. This shared disturbance is the earliest form of collective emotion. Not yet empathy as it will one day be understood, but a recognition that the group is altered when one of its members is absent, that wholeness depends not merely on numbers, but on specific presences, on familiar patterns of movement, on the subtle reassurance of knowing who is where and that they remain within reach. Loneliness thus expands outward from the individual into the group, transforming isolation from a purely personal experience into a communal concern, something that matters to everyone because it threatens the integrity not only of survival, but of belonging. Belonging itself begins to take shape as a concept, not as a word, not as an idea that can be discussed, but as a felt state, a condition of being that feels right, complete, grounded, contrasted sharply by the wrongness of separation, the unease of being cut off from the shared rhythm that gives life coherence. As human minds grow increasingly capable of holding past experiences in emotional memory, loneliness gains depth because it is no longer limited to the present moment, but can be anticipated before it occurs and remembered long after it has passed, creating a temporal bridge between what was, what is, and what might be lost again. This temporal extension is crucial. It allows humans to feel loneliness even when they are not physically alone, simply by imagining absence, by sensing distance, by recognizing that connection is fragile and must be maintained. It is here that loneliness begins to influence communication in more deliberate ways. Sounds change. Calls become more frequent, not only to coordinate movement or warn of danger, but to reaffirm presence, to say in the simplest possible terms, "I am here," and to listen for the answering sound that says, "I hear you." These exchanges carry emotional reassurance. They soothe the nervous system. They quiet the ache of potential separation. They bind individuals together across space, weaving an invisible net of awareness that stretches beyond immediate proximity. Over time, certain sounds become familiar, associated with specific individuals, not just as identifiers but as emotional anchors, signals that bring comfort precisely because of who produces them, because of the history they carry, because of the connection they represent. This is the earliest form of personal identity, not identity as self-concept, but identity as emotional presence. To hear a familiar sound in the dark is to feel less alone. To fail to hear it is to feel the pull of loneliness again. Thus, the absence of sound becomes meaningful. Silence is no longer neutral. It can signify safety or danger or loss depending on context. Loneliness sharpens perception, teaching the mind to read absence as carefully as presence, to listen not only for what is there, but for what should be there and is not. This sensitivity extends beyond sound. Visual cues take on emotional significance. The sight of another human at a distance brings relief. The failure to see them where they are expected brings unease. Patterns of movement become familiar, and deviations from those patterns stand out not merely as anomalies but as emotional disruptions. In this way, loneliness trains the human mind to be socially attentive, to notice one another with greater precision, to track not only location but state, to sense when something is amiss even without obvious signs. This attentiveness deepens bonds, makes relationships more specific, more nuanced. Humans begin to relate not only to the group as a whole, but to individuals within it, recognizing differences, forming preferences, developing attachments that go beyond utility or proximity. These attachments intensify the experience of loneliness. To be separated from the group is one thing, to be separated from a particular individual is another. The ache becomes sharper, more focused, more personal. This is the beginning of grief. Not grief for death yet, but grief for absence, for separation, for the loss of shared presence that defined part of the self. Because by now the self has expanded. It is no longer contained entirely within one body. It extends outward into relationships, into shared experiences, into the ongoing awareness of others who matter. Loneliness reveals the boundaries of this expanded self by showing where it ends, by tracing the outline of what is missing when connection breaks. As these emotional structures grow more complex, they begin to influence decision-making. Humans take risks to avoid separation. They wait longer, search harder, return more often. They choose routes that keep the group together rather than those that might be faster but risk fragmentation. They invest energy in maintaining cohesion, not because it increases immediate survival odds, but because separation feels wrong, costly, destabilizing. Loneliness thus becomes a selective force. Not through natural selection alone, but through cultural selection, shaping which behaviors persist, which patterns are reinforced, which ways of living feel sustainable and which feel intolerable. Groups that manage loneliness effectively, by staying connected, by communicating, by maintaining bonds, function more smoothly, experience less internal disruption, and over time pass these patterns forward. Groups that fragment repeatedly experience greater emotional strain, greater disorganization, greater loss, even if they survive physically. In this way, loneliness quietly shapes the future of human societies long before societies exist. As generations pass, children are born into emotional environments already structured by this awareness of connection and absence. They learn without instruction that being held matters, that being near matters, that being seen and heard matters, because when these things are missing, something inside them hurts in a way that hunger alone does not explain. Caregivers respond to this hurt instinctively, not through theory or teaching, but through presence, touch, sound, restoring connection and thereby easing the child's distress. This cycle reinforces the importance of responsiveness. It strengthens attachment. It deepens the emotional bond between caregiver and child. Loneliness thus becomes the engine of care. It motivates adults to respond. It motivates children to seek. It creates a feedback loop in which connection is constantly repaired, reaffirmed, maintained. Without loneliness, there would be no urgency in these exchanges. With it, they become essential. As human cognition continues to expand, loneliness acquires symbolic power. It becomes something that can be evoked by thought alone, by memory, by imagination. A human can feel lonely while surrounded by others if the connection feels weak, distant, misaligned. This complexity introduces emotional nuance. It allows for misunderstanding, for longing that cannot be immediately resolved, for inner conflict between the desire for closeness and the fear of loss. These conflicts enrich the inner world. They make humans more introspective, more reflective, more capable of sitting with feelings that have no immediate solution. Loneliness, once a response to physical separation, becomes an emotional condition that can exist anywhere, anytime, teaching the human mind that connection is not merely about distance, but about understanding, about attunement, about being known. This realization sets the stage for everything that will follow in human history, for storytelling which bridges loneliness by sharing inner worlds, for ritual which reaffirms belonging through shared action, for art which expresses what cannot be said directly, for love which promises connection even in the face of inevitable separation. But none of this exists yet. For now it is enough that loneliness has expanded beyond its first quiet night, beyond its first aching absence, into a shaping force that continues to work patiently, invisibly, guiding human behavior, deepening relationships, transforming survival into meaning. The humans who live in this time do not know they are changing. They do not know they are becoming something new. They simply feel more when they are together, and they feel the loss more sharply when they are not. This feeling guides them, anchors them, keeps them close. As the inner world of the human mind continues to deepen, stretching quietly beyond the immediate present and into realms shaped by memory, anticipation, and imagination, loneliness begins to brush against something even more profound, something that until now has remained largely unexamined, not because it was absent, but because there was no inner space wide enough to truly hold it, and that something is the awareness of irreversible absence. The realization that some separations do not end with reunion, that some voices do not return, that some presences vanish from the shared world forever. At first, this awareness arrives indistinctly, like a shadow at the edge of perception, not yet clearly defined, not yet named, but felt as a deepening of the same ache that loneliness first introduced, an ache that now carries a heavier weight because it no longer points only toward temporary separation, but toward the possibility that absence itself can become permanent. The human group moves through the land, and over time, inevitably, someone does not rise with the others, someone does not continue the journey, someone's movement ceases, not dramatically, not ceremoniously, but quietly as bodies sometimes do, succumbing to injury, illness, exhaustion, or age in a world where survival is never guaranteed and where explanations are few. Before loneliness entered the human mind, death was a disruption, a practical problem, a change in the structure of the group that demanded adjustment, but it did not yet carry the emotional gravity it will one day hold, because without the deep internalization of connection, without the ability to feel absence as loss, death could not yet fully wound the inner world. Now, however, something is different. Now, when a human does not return, the absence is felt not only as a gap in movement or labor, but as a tearing in the emotional fabric that binds the group together, a tearing that cannot be repaired by proximity alone, because the one who is missing cannot be imagined back into presence, cannot be summoned by calls, cannot be found by searching. Loneliness sharpens into something heavier. It deepens, it slows the group, it lingers. The human mind reaches outward as it has learned to do, seeking familiar patterns, familiar sounds, familiar movements, and when they do not appear, the mind does not simply move on but circles the absence, returning to it again and again as if repetition might somehow fill the hollow space where presence once lived. This circling is the beginning of grief. Not yet ritualized, not yet expressed, but deeply felt. The mind struggles with the contradiction. The world continues, the sun rises, the group moves, yet something essential is missing, something that mattered, something that shaped the self simply by being there. Loneliness makes this contradiction impossible to ignore. Without loneliness, absence might pass unnoticed. With it, absence becomes unbearable. The human begins to understand, not intellectually but emotionally, that some connections do not merely change or fade, but end, and that this ending leaves a mark that does not heal in the same way that hunger or fatigue do, because it is not a physical lack but a relational one. The mind, now capable of holding images of others internally, continues to summon the missing presence, replaying gestures, movements, expressions, not because it expects them to return, but because letting them vanish entirely feels wrong, as if erasing them would diminish the self, would collapse part of the inner world that has already been built around shared experience. Memory becomes sacred, not in a spiritual sense yet, but in an emotional one. To remember is to keep the absent present in some form. To forget feels like a second loss. And so the human mind clings to memory, revisiting it, reshaping it, allowing it to occupy mental space long after physical presence has ended. This mental occupation is not passive, it affects behavior. Humans linger near places associated with the missing. They move more slowly past familiar paths. They pause without knowing why at locations where something once happened. These pauses are not strategic, they are emotional echoes. The land itself begins to carry meaning, not just as terrain, but as memory. Loneliness thus binds humans not only to one another, but to places, anchoring emotion to geography, creating landscapes of remembrance long before monuments or markers exist. As these experiences repeat across generations, the human mind becomes increasingly aware of time, not as a measured sequence, but as a flowing continuum in which past and present overlap emotionally, where what has been continues to influence what is, where absence can be felt long after the moment of separation has passed. This awareness introduces a new layer of loneliness, the loneliness of time. The sense that the past is unreachable, that moments cannot be returned to, that connection exists not only across space but across memory, and that some distances cannot be crossed. This temporal loneliness deepens reflection. It encourages stillness. It invites the mind to turn inward more often, to sit with feelings that have no immediate resolution, to endure discomfort without action, to accept that some losses cannot be undone. This endurance strengthens the inner world. It expands emotional capacity. It teaches the mind that not all pain demands escape, that some pain must simply be carried. As loneliness and grief intertwine, humans begin to respond to one another differently. Comfort emerges, not as instruction, but as instinct. When one human withdraws, others stay closer. When silence deepens, others remain nearby. Touch lingers longer. Presence becomes intentional. These responses do not remove loneliness or grief, but they soften them, demonstrating that while absence cannot always be repaired, connection can still be offered, that pain does not have to be endured entirely alone. This is the beginning of compassion, not yet moralized, not yet named, but enacted. Loneliness teaches humans not only what it feels like to be alone, but what it feels like to witness another's aloneness, and this witnessing creates a subtle responsibility, a pull toward easing the burden when possible, toward sharing presence even when no solution exists. The human mind thus begins to differentiate between physical survival and emotional survival. A group may be fed, sheltered, moving effectively through the landscape, yet still feel diminished by loss, still feel incomplete, still feel the ache of something missing. This realization alters priorities. It makes emotional continuity matter. It makes remembrance matter. It makes the preservation of bonds across time matter. Loneliness gives rise to the earliest forms of symbolic behavior, not as art yet, not as ritual yet, but as repeated actions that serve no immediate practical purpose other than to acknowledge absence, to hold space for what is gone. A place where the missing once slept is avoided or visited deliberately. An object they used is kept longer than necessary. A path associated with them is walked differently. These behaviors are not conscious memorials, they are emotional habits. But they serve the same function. They integrate loss into ongoing life, allowing the group to move forward without erasing what has been lost. As the capacity for symbolic thought grows, loneliness becomes intertwined with imagination in more complex ways. Humans begin to imagine not only reunion but continuation. They imagine the missing as still somehow present, still observing, still connected in ways that transcend physical absence. These imaginings are not beliefs yet. They are emotional necessities. The mind seeks to relieve the tension between connection and irreversibility, between love and loss, and imagination offers a bridge, however fragile, between what is and what is no longer accessible. This bridge is the precursor to spirituality, not doctrine, not theology, but the felt sense that connection might persist beyond immediate perception, that absence does not necessarily mean annihilation, that relationship may outlast physical proximity. Loneliness demands this possibility. Without it, the ache would be too great. With it, the mind finds a way to carry loss without breaking. As these ideas circulate quietly through generations, the human inner world grows increasingly layered, capable of holding contradictory feelings at once: presence and absence, love and loss, attachment and impermanence. Loneliness becomes less raw but more profound. It is no longer only the pain of being without others, but the awareness that all connections are temporary, that all presence contains the seed of absence, that to love is to risk loss. This awareness does not diminish connection, it intensifies it. Moments together feel more precious, time shared feels more meaningful, attention deepens, care becomes more deliberate. Loneliness, by revealing impermanence, teaches the human mind to cherish. This teaching reshapes social structures. Groups become more cohesive not just for survival, but for emotional continuity. They develop ways of staying together, of returning, of maintaining contact across distance. Migration becomes patterned, movement becomes cyclical. Humans return to familiar places, familiar groups, familiar rhythms, not only because resources are there, but because emotional memory draws them back, because connection has become part of what makes a place livable. Loneliness thus roots humans in both people and place. It creates home, not as shelter alone, but as emotional geography. A space where absence hurts more because presence matters more. As children grow within this emotional landscape, they inherit not only survival skills but emotional expectations. They learn without instruction that being seen matters, that being held matters, that being remembered matters. They learn that separation hurts and that reunion heals, even if only partially. They learn that some losses cannot be healed, only honored, and through this learning the human species becomes capable of something unprecedented, a sustained inner life shaped by relationships that extend beyond the present moment, relationships that define the self across time, relationships that continue to influence behavior long after physical presence has ended. Loneliness is the thread that weaves all of this together. It is the pain that reveals value, the absence that defines presence, the ache that teaches the heart what it cannot afford to lose. As loneliness continues to shape the inner architecture of the human mind, pressing gently but persistently against the boundaries of awareness, it begins to demand something new, something that mere presence or memory alone can no longer fully provide, because the ache it creates is not always satisfied by reunion, nor fully eased by touch, nor resolved by survival. And so the mind, in its quiet, adaptive way, turns toward expression, toward sharing what is felt inside with others who feel something similar, even if neither fully understands what is being shared. This is the beginning of storytelling, not storytelling as narrative, not yet shaped by plot or sequence or explanation, but storytelling as emotional transmission, as the attempt to place inner experience into the shared space between humans, to make loneliness visible, audible, felt by another, so that the burden of it does not remain entirely within one mind. At first, this sharing is wordless. It exists in gesture, in posture, in sound. A human lingers near another longer than necessary. A look is held, a low sound is repeated. A rhythm emerges in movement or voice that carries feeling rather than information. These expressions do not describe loneliness, they embody it. And because other humans now possess inner worlds capable of resonance, capable of recognizing absence and longing within themselves, these expressions are received not as noise or randomness, but as meaningful signals, as invitations into shared emotional space. Loneliness thus becomes communicable, and once loneliness can be shared, it begins to change. Not disappearing but transforming, because shared loneliness is different from solitary loneliness, lighter somehow, more bearable, because it confirms that the ache is not unique, not isolating in itself, but part of a common human experience. This confirmation is powerful. It reduces the fear that loneliness carries. It reframes it from a personal failure into a shared condition. And in doing so, it deepens bonds even further. Humans begin to gather not only for survival, but for emotional alignment, for moments of togetherness that serve no immediate practical purpose other than to be together, to exist within the same emotional rhythm, to feel the reassurance of shared presence that quiets the inner ache. These gatherings are subtle. They are not yet ceremonies, but they mark a shift. Humans sit longer near one another. They remain together after tasks are complete. They move less abruptly away. Time itself begins to be shaped by emotional needs, not only environmental demands. Loneliness thus alters the perception of time. Moments together feel expandable. Moments alone feel elongated, heavy. The human mind begins to measure experience not only in terms of activity, but in terms of connection, marking internal time by closeness and distance rather than by daylight or hunger. This internal timekeeping sets the stage for narrative. Because narrative requires a sense of before and after, of change over time, of events connected by meaning rather than mere sequence. Loneliness supplies this sense. It highlights transitions. It marks moments of separation and reunion as emotionally significant. It encourages the mind to remember not just what happened, but how it felt, and to share those feelings so that others may recognize themselves within them. As vocal abilities slowly expand, shaped by the need to coordinate, to reassure, to maintain contact, sounds begin to carry more nuance. A call can signal location, another can signal distress, another can signal reassurance. Over time, these sounds become associated not only with external conditions, but with internal states. A particular sound may come to represent longing, another comfort, another loss. These associations are not yet formalized, but they are consistent enough to be recognized, and recognition allows for shared meaning. Shared meaning is the seed of language. Language does not arise first to name objects, it arises to bridge inner worlds, to say in effect, what I feel, you feel too. Loneliness is the force that makes this bridging necessary. Without loneliness, there would be little need to share inner experience. With it, sharing becomes essential, because unshared loneliness grows heavier over time. Shared loneliness becomes manageable. And so humans begin unconsciously to build systems of expression that allow inner states to move outward, to be held collectively, to be acknowledged and responded to. These systems grow slowly. They are shaped by repetition, by what works, by what elicits response. A sound that brings others closer is repeated. A gesture that draws attention is refined. An expression that soothes is preserved. Through countless small interactions, the human species begins to develop a shared emotional vocabulary, long before it develops a spoken one. This vocabulary allows humans to signal not only danger or need, but emotional states, including loneliness, grief, longing, and comfort. As these capacities grow, humans begin to anticipate loneliness in others. They recognize withdrawal. They notice silence. They sense when someone is emotionally distant, even if physically present. This anticipation leads to proactive connection. Humans approach one another not only in response to visible distress, but to prevent it, staying close, offering presence, maintaining contact in ways that minimize the emergence of loneliness before it becomes overwhelming. This proactive care strengthens social cohesion. It creates trust. It builds expectations. Humans come to expect that their loneliness will be noticed, that it will matter, that others will respond. These expectations shape behavior. They make vulnerability possible, because to express loneliness requires exposing inner need. It requires trusting that others will not ignore or exploit that need. As trust grows, inner worlds open further. Humans begin to share not only loneliness, but the thoughts and images that accompany it. They reenact experiences. They gesture toward places where something happened. They use sound and movement to recreate moments of separation or reunion. These reenactments are the earliest stories, not told to entertain, not told to explain, but told to connect, to align emotional experience. To say, this happened to me and it mattered, and to hear in response, it matters to me too. As storytelling emerges, loneliness takes on a new role. It becomes not only a signal of absence, but a source of meaning. Stories often center on loss, separation, return, on journeys away from the group and back again, on dangers faced alone. On loved ones remembered. These stories do not eliminate loneliness. They contextualize it. They give it shape. They place it within a shared narrative that makes it less chaotic, less overwhelming, more integrated into the human understanding of life. Through story, loneliness becomes something that can be anticipated, endured, remembered, and shared. It becomes part of the human condition, not an anomaly, not a weakness, but a defining feature. As stories are shared across generations, children grow up hearing echoes of loneliness long before they experience it fully themselves. They learn implicitly that separation is painful, that absence matters, that reunion is meaningful. These lessons prepare them emotionally. They give structure to feelings when they arise. They prevent loneliness from feeling entirely alien. Thus, storytelling becomes a buffer, a way of containing loneliness within cultural frameworks that make it survivable. As storytelling deepens, humans begin to seek meaning beyond immediate experience. They ask implicitly why separation happens, why loss occurs, why some absences cannot be undone. Loneliness fuels these questions. It demands explanation, not necessarily accurate explanation, but emotionally satisfying explanation. The mind seeks patterns, reasons, continuity, and so humans begin to imagine forces beyond immediate perception that influence presence and absence. They imagine that the missing are not simply gone but elsewhere. That connection persists in unseen ways. That loneliness may be temporary even when physical separation appears permanent. These imaginings soothe the ache, they offer hope. They create narratives in which absence is not annihilation. This is the dawn of myth, not myth as falsehood, but myth as meaning-making, as the attempt to reconcile deep emotional truths with an unpredictable world. Loneliness is the engine of myth because it creates a gap between what is and what is desired, a gap that demands to be filled with story, symbol, belief. Through myth, humans place loneliness within a larger framework. They imagine origins, destinies, cycles of separation and return. They create explanations that allow the heart to rest, even if the mind cannot fully understand. As these frameworks solidify, loneliness becomes less overwhelming. It is still painful, but it is held, contained. Shared, integrated, the human inner world becomes vast enough to accommodate it without collapsing. And in doing so, the human species takes another step away from pure reaction and toward reflection, away from mere survival and toward meaning. Loneliness has guided this transformation at every stage, from the first quiet night alone beneath the stars, to the deepening of memory and attachment, to the birth of grief and compassion, to the emergence of storytelling and myth. It has been the silent architect of the human inner world, shaping how humans relate to one another, to time, to loss, to hope. And still it continues its work, because even as humans grow more connected, more expressive, more capable of sharing inner experience, loneliness never disappears entirely. It remains as a reminder, a signal, a teacher. It reminds humans that connection matters, that presence is precious, that absence hurts because something meaningful exists. As the weight of shared stories settles gently into the collective awareness of early human groups, loneliness no longer exists only as a private ache carried silently within individual minds, but begins to surface in moments when humans come together deliberately, not for hunting, not for movement, not for shelter, but for remembrance, for acknowledgement, for the quiet recognition that something or someone is missing, and that this absence deserves space, attention, and shared presence. These moments do not yet resemble ceremonies as later humans will know them, but they are distinct from ordinary gatherings, marked by a subtle slowing of movement, a lingering stillness, a collective orientation toward a place, an object, or a memory that carries emotional significance, as if the group itself senses that ordinary rhythms must pause to accommodate something deeper, something that cannot be hurried without harm. Loneliness gives rise to ritual because ritual offers structure where absence would otherwise feel chaotic, unbearable, and unresolved, providing a container for grief, longing, and remembrance that allows these feelings to be held collectively rather than borne alone, transforming private pain into shared meaning. When a member of the group is gone, whether through death, separation, or disappearance, the group begins to return intentionally or instinctively to places associated with that individual, not because those places offer resources or safety, but because they hold emotional residue, traces of presence that linger in memory and sensation. And by returning together, the group affirms that the absence matters, that the one who is gone is not erased by time or movement. These returns are unspoken acknowledgments. No one explains why they stop, no one instructs others to be still, Yet everyone understands, the air itself feels different, movement softens, sounds grow quieter. The group collectively enters a different mode of being, one attuned not to the immediate environment, but to the shared inner world that has grown rich enough to include memory, loss, and reverence. Loneliness is transformed in these moments. It is still present, still aching, still unresolved, but it is no longer isolating because it is mirrored in the posture, silence, and attention of others, creating a powerful sense of unity in absence, a paradoxical togetherness born not of presence, but of shared loss. This shared loss deepens bonds. It creates a sense of continuity across time, linking those who remain with those who are gone, weaving past and present into a single emotional fabric that stretches beyond the immediate moment, giving human experience a depth that extends backward and forward, anchoring identity not only in who is here but in who has been. Ritual emerges as repetition. The group returns again. They pause again. They sit again. Not because repetition changes the outcome, but because repetition changes the meaning. Each return reinforces the idea that absence is not something to be ignored or rushed past, but something to be acknowledged, integrated, carried. Loneliness, once sharp and disorienting, becomes more familiar through ritual. It acquires boundaries. It gains a beginning and an end. It becomes something that can be entered and exited, rather than something that overwhelms without warning. This containment is essential. Without it, loneliness would remain raw, unpredictable, destabilizing. With it, loneliness becomes manageable, even instructive. It teaches the group how to hold loss without fragmenting, how to move forward without forgetting, how to remain connected even when connection has been broken. As these rituals take shape, humans begin to recognize that certain times are different from others, not because of external conditions, but because of internal significance. A day when someone is remembered feels different from a day of ordinary movement. A night spent together in stillness feels different from a night spent resting after labor. Time becomes layered with meaning. Certain moments are marked not by what happens, but by what is remembered. This marking of time is the foundation of collective memory. Loneliness drives this process because it resists erasure. It insists that absence be acknowledged. It refuses to fade quietly into the background of survival. Through ritual, loneliness becomes part of shared time, part of the group's rhythm, shaping when and how humans gather, pause, and reflect. As rituals deepen, they begin to incorporate symbols not as abstract representations, but as tangible anchors for memory and feeling. An object associated with the absent is held. A place where something occurred is revisited. A particular sound or gesture is repeated. These symbols carry emotional weight because they condense complex inner experiences into shared forms that others can recognize, respond to, and remember. Loneliness is thus externalized. It moves from the inner world into the shared environment, becoming something that can be seen, touched, heard, even if it cannot be fully explained. This externalization is powerful. It allows loneliness to be approached indirectly, to be held without overwhelming the individual, to be shared without requiring full articulation. It creates a common language of feeling that transcends individual experience. As belief begins to emerge alongside ritual, loneliness takes on metaphysical dimensions. Humans begin to imagine that absence is not absolute, that those who are gone continue in some form beyond immediate perception, not because this belief can be proven, but because it offers emotional coherence, because it aligns with the deep human need to preserve connection in the face of irreversibility. These beliefs are not rigid, they are fluid. They change from group to group, from generation to generation. But they share a common purpose: to soften the finality of absence, to create continuity where reality offers none, to allow the heart to remain open even when loss threatens to close it. Loneliness fuels these beliefs by making absence intolerable without meaning. Belief offers meaning. Together, they shape the earliest spiritual frameworks, long before organized religion, long before doctrine or hierarchy, arising simply from the human need to reconcile deep attachment with a world that does not guarantee permanence. As these frameworks take root, humans begin to gather not only in response to specific losses, but in anticipation of them, creating regular moments of collective remembrance that affirm connection across time, reinforcing group identity, strengthening bonds that extend beyond immediate relationships. These gatherings reassure individuals that their loneliness will be met, that their losses will be recognized, that their inner experiences are part of a larger shared reality. This reassurance fosters trust. Trust allows vulnerability. Vulnerability deepens connection, and deeper connection in turn makes loneliness both more intense and more meaningful because it now reflects not only separation but the value of what is shared. Loneliness becomes a compass. It points toward what matters most. It signals where attention should go. It reveals the emotional center of the group. As rituals and beliefs continue to evolve, loneliness also shapes morality. Humans begin to recognize that causing separation unnecessarily, ignoring another's isolation, abandoning someone in distress, creates not only physical danger but emotional harm, disrupting the delicate fabric of connection that holds the group together. This recognition gives rise to early moral instincts, not articulated as rules, but felt as unease, as discomfort, as the sense that something is wrong when connection is broken without care. Compassion grows stronger. Responsibility deepens. Humans feel accountable not only for survival, but for one another's inner well-being. Loneliness teaches this accountability by making the cost of neglect visible, by showing how deeply absence can wound, how long its effects can linger. As the human inner world grows more complex, loneliness also begins to shape individual identity. Humans start to see themselves not only as members of a group, but as carriers of unique relationships, unique memories, unique losses, each shaping who they are in subtle but lasting ways. Identity becomes relational. It is defined by who one has been with, who one has lost, who one remembers. Loneliness highlights these relationships by marking their absence. It makes identity visible through contrast. Who am I when this person is gone? What remains of me when this connection is broken? These questions are not asked explicitly, but they are lived, they are felt, they guide behavior, they influence choices, they shape the emerging sense of self. As humans begin to form larger groups interacting with other groups, loneliness also shapes intergroup relations. Separation from familiar bonds makes new connections more tentative, more cautious. Humans seek to recreate the sense of belonging they know, to establish new bonds that can carry emotional weight, to extend the circle of connection without losing its depth. This balance between openness and attachment is delicate. Loneliness makes it necessary. Without loneliness, humans might drift endlessly. With it, they seek home. Even as migration continues, even as landscapes change, the need for emotional grounding remains constant, pulling humans toward places and people that offer familiarity, continuity, recognition. Loneliness thus anchors human movement. It gives direction to wandering. It shapes patterns of settlement. It encourages return. It creates roots long before permanent dwellings exist. Throughout all of this, loneliness remains paradoxical. It hurts because connection exists. It teaches because attachment matters. It deepens because relationships grow richer. It never fully resolves because impermanence remains. And yet, it is precisely this unresolved nature that keeps the human story moving forward, driving creativity, connection, meaning-making, and the relentless search for understanding. At this stage in the human journey, loneliness has become woven into every aspect of life, shaping how humans gather, remember, believe, care, and identify themselves, no longer merely a response to being alone, but a fundamental force guiding the evolution of human consciousness. It is present in silence and in sound, in movement and stillness, in loss and in love. It is the quiet undertone beneath every shared moment, reminding humans of what binds them together and what they fear to lose. As loneliness continues its quiet, persistent work within the human mind, pressing outward from feeling into expression, it begins to seek permanence, something that can endure beyond the fleeting moment of shared presence, something that can remain when voices fade, when bodies move on, when time itself carries people away from one another. And it is here that humans begin, almost without realizing it, to create traces of their inner worlds, marks that do not merely serve survival, but exist to say someone was here, someone felt this, someone mattered. At first, these traces are accidental, a pattern in the dirt made by repeated sitting, a stone placed where a hand often rests, a branch arranged not for function, but because it feels right to leave it there. These marks are not intentional symbols yet, but they are meaningful because they arise from repetition driven by emotion rather than necessity, from the quiet urge to externalize something that cannot remain entirely inside without becoming too heavy to carry. Loneliness fuels this urge. It whispers that presence is temporary, that memory fades, that without something left behind, absence will feel absolute. And so humans begin to alter their environment in small, subtle ways that reflect inner states, creating the earliest forms of symbolic expression long before anyone understands what symbols are. Over time, these traces become more deliberate. A mark is scratched into stone, a shape is repeated, a pattern is recreated in different places. These actions are slow, careful, and often solitary, yet they are meant for others, meant to be seen, recognized, felt, even if not fully understood. They say, without words I was here, and I felt something that mattered enough to leave a mark. Loneliness is what gives these marks urgency. Without loneliness, there would be little reason to preserve experience beyond the moment. With it, the fear of disappearance becomes real. The fear that one's inner world might vanish without trace, that connection might dissolve without residue, that absence might erase meaning. Art, in its earliest form, emerges as resistance to this erasure. It is not created to beautify. It is created to endure, to bridge distance across time, to allow presence to echo after physical proximity has ended. As humans encounter these marks left by others, something profound happens. They recognize intention. They feel connection across absence. They realize that someone else, perhaps long gone, experienced something similar, felt something worth marking, cared enough to leave a trace. Loneliness softens in these moments because the human is no longer alone in time. The inner world reaches backward and finds companionship in memory made visible. This recognition deepens the emotional impact of marks and symbols. They become anchors for shared meaning. A simple line becomes more than a line. It becomes evidence of another mind, another feeling, another presence. And this evidence matters deeply to a species that has learned how painful absence can be. As symbolic expression grows more sophisticated, humans begin to create images that reflect not only their external world but their internal one. Shapes resemble animals not only because animals are important for survival, but because animals are companions in memory, in story, in shared experience. Figures resemble humans not only because humans are central, but because representing one another is a way of holding presence when bodies are absent. Hands appear in marks. Outlines of bodies, traces of movement. These representations are not portraits, they are impressions. They capture essence rather than detail. They say this being mattered. Loneliness gives these representations emotional force. They are not decorations, they are acts of connection. They allow humans to encounter one another beyond immediate proximity, to feel presence in the absence of the physical body, to maintain relational continuity across space and time. As art spreads, humans begin to gather around these creations. They pause, they look, they sit quietly. The atmosphere around these marks feels different. The space feels charged, meaningful. These gatherings echo earlier rituals of remembrance, but now they are oriented not only toward memory of the lost, but toward shared reflection, toward collective acknowledgement of inner experience made visible. Art becomes a meeting place for inner worlds, a shared surface upon which emotions can rest. Loneliness is transformed again. It is no longer only an ache within individuals or a bond between those present. It becomes something that can be addressed indirectly, through shared attention to a created form that holds feeling without demanding immediate response. Art allows humans to sit with loneliness without being consumed by it, to approach it gently, to contemplate it, to feel less alone simply by knowing that someone else, at some other time, felt something similar enough to leave a mark behind. As symbolic creation deepens, humans begin to associate certain places with meaning beyond utility. A cave becomes more than shelter. A wall becomes more than stone. A clearing becomes more than open ground. These places become emotional landmarks, locations where inner experience has been externalized, where memory has been anchored, where loneliness has been acknowledged and transformed into something shareable. Place and meaning intertwine. Loneliness roots itself not only in people, but in environments, shaping how humans relate to the land itself, imbuing geography with emotional significance. This emotional geography influences movement. Humans return to meaningful places. They revisit them. They bring others there. They pass knowledge of them forward. These places become early centers of culture, not because they offer resources, but because they hold shared emotional history, because they represent continuity, because they offer reassurance that connection can persist beyond individual lifetimes. Loneliness, once tied to immediate separation, now stretches across generations. A human can feel connected to someone they have never met through shared symbols, shared stories, shared marks left behind. This is a revolutionary shift. It allows the human species to build continuity beyond direct relationships, to create collective identity that transcends individual presence. It allows culture to emerge. Culture is loneliness made durable. It is the attempt to preserve connection beyond the limits of proximity, beyond the fragility of memory, beyond the finality of death. Every mark, every symbol, every shared story is a response to the same quiet fear, that what matters might vanish if it is not held, shared, remembered. Loneliness keeps that fear alive, but it also provides the motivation to address it creatively. As humans become more adept at symbolic thought, they begin to layer meaning. A symbol no longer represents only presence. It can represent absence, loss, longing, hope, continuity. A single image can hold multiple emotional states at once. This complexity mirrors the growing complexity of the human inner world, now capable of holding contradictory feelings, of sitting with ambiguity, of understanding that absence and connection can coexist. Loneliness teaches this lesson gently but relentlessly. It teaches that one can feel connected even when alone, and lonely even when surrounded, that the quality of connection matters as much as its existence. That meaning arises not from eliminating absence, but from relating to it honestly. Art becomes a medium for this honesty. It allows humans to express what cannot be resolved, to show rather than explain, to offer feeling without demanding closure. This offering invites response. Others create their own marks, their own symbols. A dialogue begins, not spoken, but visible. A conversation across time and space, carried by shared forms that accumulate meaning through repetition and recognition. This dialogue strengthens group identity. It reinforces the sense that individuals belong to something larger than themselves, something that persists beyond their own presence, something that will continue after they are gone. Loneliness, which once threatened to isolate the self, now paradoxically expands it, linking the individual to a lineage of failing, to a continuum of shared inner experience that stretches backward and forward beyond immediate perception. As these practices become more established, humans begin to teach them. Not explicitly, but through example. Children watch, they imitate, they learn that making marks matters, that returning to certain places matters, that sitting quietly together matters. They absorb the emotional logic underlying these actions, learning that inner experience is worthy of expression, that loneliness is not something to hide, but something that can be transformed into connection through shared creation. This learning shapes future generations. It prepares them to face absence with tools beyond instinct, with cultural resources that help them endure, remember, and connect. Loneliness becomes less overwhelming because it is no longer faced alone. It is met with symbols, stories, rituals, and art that provide context and continuity. Yet loneliness never disappears. It remains an essential part of the human condition because it is tied to attachment, and attachment is unavoidable for a species that has learned to value connection so deeply. What changes is not the existence of loneliness, but the ways in which humans respond to it. They respond with creation, with meaning, with shared expression, with culture. Through these responses, humans reshape their relationship with absence, turning it from a purely negative experience into a source of depth, creativity, and collective identity. Loneliness becomes the well from which art draws its emotional power. It gives symbols their urgency. It gives stories their resonance. It gives rituals their gravity. Without loneliness, these forms would be empty. With it, they carry weight. As loneliness continues to press outward from the inner world into shared experience, it finds another path of expression, one even more fleeting and yet strangely more powerful than mark or image, because it does not remain fixed in place, because it cannot be seen once it has passed, and because it moves directly through the body and into the body of another, and this path is sound, not as language yet, not as speech shaped by meaning, but as rhythm, tone, vibration, and silence shaped by feeling. Sound has always existed. Wind moves, animals call, feet strike the ground. But now sound begins to change its role in human life. It becomes intentional, relational, a way of reaching across distance not only in space but in emotion. Loneliness drives this change because sound can travel where bodies cannot, because it can fill emptiness without requiring proximity, because it can reassure without touching, because it can say I am here even when the darkness makes presence uncertain. At first, these sounds are simple: a low hum, a repeated breath, a soft vocalization made not to signal danger or location, but to occupy the silence itself, to push back against the emptiness that loneliness magnifies when the world grows quiet. These sounds are often made at night, when vision fails, when separation feels closest, when the inner world grows loud. A human produces a sound, and the sound returns, echoed faintly by the surrounding space, reminding the mind that it exists within a world that responds, that vibrates, that carries presence forward even when nothing can be seen. When another human answers with a sound of their own, something remarkable happens. The space between them feels smaller. The silence feels less absolute. Loneliness softens, not because connection has been restored fully, but because the possibility of connection has been confirmed. Sound becomes a bridge, an invisible thread, a reassurance that presence exists beyond immediate perception. Over time, these sounds become patterned, not intentionally at first, but repetition shapes them. A sound that feels comforting is repeated. A rhythm that draws others closer is preserved. A cadence that soothes is remembered. Through this process, humans begin to discover rhythm, not as an abstract concept, but as a felt experience that organizes time, aligns bodies, and synchronizes inner states. Rhythm is powerful because it creates predictability. It establishes expectation. It allows the mind to anticipate what comes next. Loneliness thrives on unpredictability, on not knowing whether connection will return. Rhythm counters this by offering structure. A steady beat says this continues. A repeated pattern says you are not alone in time. When humans gather and produce sound together, clapping, stamping, vocalizing, the effect is profound. Bodies begin to move in synchrony. Breathing aligns, heart rates adjust. The sense of self softens at the edges, blending slightly into the group, creating a feeling of unity that directly counters loneliness by dissolving the sharp boundaries that separate one individual from another. This dissolution is not permanent, but it is meaningful. It offers relief. It teaches the human mind that loneliness can be eased not only by physical closeness, but by shared rhythm, by coordinated sound, by moving and vocalizing together in time. Sound becomes a tool for emotional regulation, not consciously, not scientifically, but experientially. Humans learn that certain sounds calm, others energize, others invite reflection. They learn that silence, too, carries weight. That shared silence can feel different from solitary silence. Shared silence can feel full, intentional, holding space rather than emptying it. Loneliness teaches this distinction, because the loneliness of silence alone is heavy and pressing, while the silence shared with others feels held, contained, supported by the awareness of presence just beyond sound. As sound-based gatherings become more common, they begin to take on ritual significance. Certain rhythms are used in moments of remembrance. Certain tones accompany grief. Certain sounds mark transition, reunion, departure. These sounds are not chosen arbitrarily. They emerge from emotional necessity. They feel right because they resonate with the inner state they accompany. Loneliness shapes these choices. A slow, steady rhythm mirrors the weight of loss. A rising tone mirrors hope. A repeating chant mirrors the persistence of memory. Through sound, humans give form to feelings that have no clear shape. Music in its earliest form is loneliness given vibration. It is the inner ache turned outward, carried through air, shared among bodies, transformed into something that can be felt collectively rather than endured alone. As these practices deepen, humans begin to recognize that sound can summon presence. A familiar rhythm can bring people together. A familiar call can draw someone back from a distance. A familiar melody can evoke memory. even in the absence of the one who first made it. Sound becomes a carrier of identity. Not just individual identity, but group identity. A shared sound means us. It marks belonging. It signals inclusion. To know the sound is to be part of the group. To respond to it is to affirm connection. Loneliness thus shapes social boundaries, not in an excluding way at first, but in a defining one. Sound delineates who is together, who recognizes the rhythm, who shares the emotional language embedded in tone and tempo. This shared sonic language deepens trust. It creates familiarity. It reduces uncertainty, and uncertainty is one of loneliness's sharpest edges. As humans grow more adept at shaping sound, they begin to explore its emotional range. They discover that sound can express joy as well as sorrow, anticipation as well as loss, togetherness as well as longing. Music does not replace loneliness. It dialogues with it, sometimes amplifying it, sometimes soothing it, sometimes transforming it into something bittersweet, a feeling that holds both pain and beauty at once. This bittersweet quality is uniquely human. It arises because the human mind can hold contradictory feelings simultaneously, can feel loss and gratitude together, absence and presence intertwined. Loneliness is the condition that makes this complexity possible. Without loneliness, there would be no longing. Without longing, there would be no depth. Music becomes the space where this depth can be explored safely, where the heart can touch its own ache without being overwhelmed, where feeling can be shared without explanation. As these sonic practices spread, they begin to accompany other forms of expression. Music pairs with ritual, with storytelling, with movement. Dance emerges not as performance, but as embodied sound, as rhythm moving through the body, as loneliness transformed into motion, shaking loose the stiffness that grief and absence leave behind. When humans move together to sound, the separation between bodies softens. They occupy shared time, shared space, shared sensation. This shared sensation is profoundly grounding. It reminds the mind that it belongs within a living system of bodies and voices, that it is not isolated, that it is part of a pulse larger than itself. Loneliness recedes in these moments not because it is gone, but because it has been acknowledged, expressed, transformed into something connective. As these practices become part of human life, they are passed down. Children grow up hearing rhythms before they understand words. They feel sound in their bodies. They associate certain tones with comfort, certain patterns with safety, certain silences with reverence. This early exposure shapes their emotional regulation. It teaches them how to soothe themselves, how to seek others, how to participate in shared emotional spaces. Loneliness, when it arises, is met with familiar sounds, familiar rhythms, familiar practices that remind the child that they are not alone in their feeling, that others have felt this before, that there are ways to move through it. Music becomes an emotional inheritance, a cultural response to loneliness that transcends individual experience. It carries the wisdom of countless previous encounters with absence, loss, longing, and connection, condensed into rhythm and tone that can be felt instantly, without explanation, without translation. As human societies grow more complex, these sonic traditions will diversify, branching into countless forms, each shaped by environment, history, and shared emotional needs. But at their core, they will all carry the same function: to bridge inner worlds, to soften loneliness, to affirm connection across distance and time. Even when humans eventually live in vast communities, surrounded by many others, loneliness will persist because numbers do not guarantee connection and presence does not guarantee understanding. Music will remain vital because it speaks directly to the emotional layer where loneliness lives, bypassing logic, bypassing explanation, reaching straight into the shared human nervous system. It will remind humans of something ancient, of nights long ago when sound pushed back the darkness. When rhythm held bodies together, when loneliness found relief in vibration. As loneliness continues to deepen its influence, pressing not only outward into sound and ritual but inward into awareness itself, the human mind begins to experience a subtle but profound shift, one that reshapes how existence is felt from the inside, because connection, once known and valued, inevitably casts a shadow. And that shadow is the realization that each mind is, at its core, separate, enclosed within its own perceptions, memories, and sensations, never fully accessible to another. No matter how close bodies may be or how synchronized rhythms become, this realization does not arrive suddenly. It unfolds gradually, quietly, as an accumulation of moments in which the human feels both together and apart at the same time, moments in which shared presence does not fully dissolve the sense of interiority, moments in which even surrounded by others, the inner world remains private, unreachable, its contents known only to the one who experiences them. Loneliness sharpens this awareness, because loneliness is not simply the absence of others, but the awareness of distance between inner worlds. It is the feeling that something essential exists inside that cannot be fully transferred, fully shared, fully merged with another, no matter how deeply one longs to do so. This is the birth of individuality, not individuality as ego or self-importance, but individuality as the recognition of being a separate center of experience. A single point of awareness looking out upon a world filled with other points of awareness, each equally real, equally enclosed, equally unreachable in their entirety. This recognition brings with it a new kind of loneliness, a quieter one, more persistent, because it cannot be solved by proximity alone. The human may sit among others, hear their voices, feel their warmth, move in rhythm with them, and still sense a subtle distance, a gap that no physical closeness can entirely close. This gap is not failure, it is structure. It is the architecture of consciousness itself, and loneliness is the feeling that reveals it. As this awareness grows, the human mind begins to speak to itself, not aloud, not in language yet, but in a continuous stream of sensation, memory, anticipation, and reflection that flows inward, looping back upon itself, creating an inner dialogue that never fully stops, a quiet commentary on experience that belongs to no one else. This inner dialogue becomes most noticeable in moments of solitude, when external stimulation fades and the mind turns inward, filling the quiet with thought, with memory, with imagined futures, with replays of past encounters, with questions that have no clear answers. Loneliness amplifies this inner dialogue, because when others are absent, the mind becomes more present to itself. It listens to its own movements. It notices its own reactions, begins to distinguish between what is felt inside and what is happening outside. This distinction is crucial. It allows the human to recognize that experience is subjective, that different humans may feel differently in the same situation, that inner worlds are not identical, even when bodies share space. This recognition deepens empathy, but it also deepens isolation. Because to know that others have inner worlds like one's own is also to know that those inner worlds are ultimately inaccessible. One can infer, one can imagine, one can resonate, but one cannot enter. Loneliness lives in this gap. It is the ache of separation that remains even when all practical needs are met, even when connection is strong, even when belonging is secure. It is the awareness that no matter how close humans grow, they remain distinct, separate, singular. This awareness changes how humans relate to one another. They begin to notice differences more clearly, differences in reaction, in preference, in attention, in emotional tone. These differences were always present, but now they matter. They shape relationships, they create misunderstandings, they require negotiation. Loneliness makes these differences visible by highlighting moments when connection falters, when resonance fails, when one mind cannot fully follow another. These moments can be painful, but they are also instructive. They teach humans that connection is not automatic, that it requires effort, attention, care. They teach that closeness is something that must be maintained, not assumed. Loneliness thus becomes a motivator for understanding. Humans listen more carefully, they watch more closely, they adjust behavior, they seek alignment, not only to survive but to bridge inner distance. This effort gives rise to communication that is increasingly nuanced, increasingly intentional, increasingly focused on conveying inner states rather than merely coordinating action. As communication grows more complex, so does the sense of self. Humans begin to recognize patterns in their own reactions. They notice that certain things make them feel more alone. Certain situations amplify the inner ache. Certain interactions soothe it. This noticing is the beginning of self-awareness as a stable trait, not just momentary reflection. The human begins to think implicitly, this is how I am, this is what I feel, this is what matters to me. These thoughts are not yet verbalized. But they are lived, they shape choices, they guide behavior, they create continuity across time. Loneliness plays a central role in this process because it is one of the most persistent inner signals, one that returns again and again, demanding attention, demanding interpretation, demanding response. It forces the human to ask implicitly, what do I need? What am I missing? What makes me feel whole? These questions shape identity. They carve out preferences. They differentiate one individual from another. Two humans may experience the same loss, the same separation, the same night alone, and yet feel it differently, respond differently, carry it differently. Loneliness reveals these differences. It highlights individuality. It makes the self visible to itself. At the same time, loneliness reinforces the desire for connection. Because the more distinct the self becomes, the more it longs to be known, to be understood, to be seen not just as a body within a group, but as a particular inner world with its own contours, its own history, its own pain and longing. This longing is profound. It drives humans to share more deeply, to express more honestly, to risk vulnerability, to expose inner states that could be misunderstood or ignored. Loneliness makes this risk necessary. Because to remain entirely enclosed is to endure a loneliness that grows heavier over time. And so humans reach outward, they test connection, they reveal pieces of themselves, they learn which revelations bring closeness and which create distance. Through this process, relationships deepen, they become more specific, more personal, more fragile, but also more meaningful. Loneliness ensures this fragility. It reminds humans that connection can be lost. That misunderstanding can widen the gap between inner worlds. That care is required to maintain closeness. This care becomes intentional. Humans begin to notice when they have hurt another, when they have withdrawn, when they have failed to respond. These failures produce discomfort, guilt, regret, not because rules have been broken, but because connection has been weakened, because loneliness has been inflicted, because the shared field of awareness has been disrupted. This discomfort is moral emotion in its earliest form, not imposed from outside, but arising from the deep understanding that isolation harms, that loneliness hurts, that causing it unnecessarily threatens the bonds upon which emotional survival depends. Thus, loneliness shapes conscience. It teaches the human mind to consider the inner states of others, to imagine how actions might affect connection, to weigh choices not only in terms of personal gain, but in terms of relational impact. This weighing deepens the sense of responsibility. It reinforces social bonds. It encourages repair when bonds are strained. Repair becomes possible because loneliness has taught humans what is at stake. They know viscerally what it feels like to be cut off. They know the ache of unshared experience. They do not want to cause it in others. At the same time, loneliness teaches humans to tolerate solitude, not as preference, but as capacity. The inner dialogue developed through loneliness allows the human to remain present to themselves when others are absent, to hold their own experience without immediate external validation, to sit with feeling without being overwhelmed. This capacity is crucial. It allows exploration, reflection, innovation. It allows the human to think differently from the group, to imagine alternatives, to step outside immediate consensus without collapsing emotionally. Individuality grows from this capacity. Creativity grows from it, change grows from it. Loneliness thus has a dual role. It binds humans together and it differentiates them. It pushes toward connection and it deepens the self. It creates tension, and from that tension, growth emerges. As this balance evolves, the human sense of self becomes increasingly layered. There is the self in the group, the self in relationship, the self alone, the self remembering, the self imagining. Loneliness weaves through all of these layers, connecting them, giving them coherence, reminding the human that identity is not fixed but relational, shaped by presence and absence alike. Even in moments of deep connection, a trace of loneliness remains, a reminder that the other is other, that complete merging is impossible, that understanding is always partial. This trace is not a flaw. It is the space in which respect grows, in which curiosity persists, in which the desire to know another continues. Without it, connection would stagnate. With it, connection remains dynamic, living, evolving. As the human mind, now fully awake to itself, turns its gaze forward as well as inward, loneliness reaches its final and most expansive form, because once a person knows they are a self, and once they know that selves are separate, and once they know that connection is precious precisely because it is fragile, one last realization inevitably arrives, quietly but with immense weight: this self will not last forever. This realization does not come as a single thought. It emerges slowly through accumulation, through the memory of those who have vanished, through the knowledge that absence can be permanent, through the growing awareness of time as something that moves forward without waiting. Loneliness sharpens this awareness because it has already taught the human what it means to lose presence, and now it extends that lesson inward, asking an unspoken question that echoes through the inner world: what happens when I am the one who is absent? This question marks a turning point. For the first time, the human does not only fear separation from others, they fear separation from the world itself, from connection, from meaning, from memory. And this fear gives rise to a new longing, deeper than reunion, deeper than companionship, deeper even than love. It gives rise to the longing for continuance, to matter beyond one's own presence, to leave something behind that endures, to remain connected even after the body no longer moves among others. Loneliness drives this longing because it knows what disappearance feels like. It knows how absolute absence can be, and it resists it, not with denial, but with creation, with memory, with legacy. Humans begin to act not only for the present moment, but for the future they will not see. They teach, they show, they repeat stories, they demonstrate skills, they share knowledge. Not merely because it helps the group survive, but because it allows something of the self to move forward in time, to echo after the body is gone, to remain part of the shared human field even in absence. This is how legacy is born, not as ambition, not as fame, but as connection extended beyond lifespan. Loneliness makes this extension necessary, because without it, the end of the self would feel like a total severing, an unbearable silence after a life filled with connection. Through legacy, humans soften that silence. They imagine themselves continuing in others' actions, others' memories, others' stories. This imagination brings comfort. It gives death context. It places the individual within a larger continuity that stretches backward and forward, making absence less final, less absolute, less isolating. Loneliness thus reshapes the human relationship with mortality. Death becomes not only an end, but a transition. Not necessarily to another place, but into memory, influence, continuity. A human may vanish physically, but their presence can remain woven into the lives of those who remember them, those who repeat their words, those who walk the paths they once walked. This belief does not eliminate grief, but it makes grief survivable. It allows love to persist even when presence ends. As this understanding spreads, humans begin to care deeply about how they are remembered. They act with consideration. They repair relationships. They seek reconciliation. They avoid causing harm that would linger after their absence. Loneliness shapes these choices by making the consequences of broken connection painfully clear. To be remembered as someone who caused isolation is to extend loneliness beyond one's own life. To be remembered as someone who brought warmth, understanding, and presence is to extend connection beyond death. Thus, loneliness becomes an ethical guide, not through rules, but through failing. Through the deep knowledge that what we do to one another lives on in memory, shaping the emotional world of those who remain. As humans pass this awareness to their children, they do so not through instruction alone, but through example. Children watch how adults treat one another, how they speak of the absent, how they honor the dead, how they tell stories, how they sit together in silence, how they comfort. Through these observations, children learn what it means to be human in a world where connection matters and absence hurts. They inherit not only skills and knowledge, but emotional orientation. They learn that loneliness is not something to flee at all costs, nor something to surrender to, but something to listen to, something that points toward what matters most. They learn that loneliness can be met with presence, with creativity, with care, with memory, with meaning, and so the human story continues. Across tens of thousands of years, across continents, across cultures, loneliness changes form, but it never disappears. It appears in crowded cities, in quiet rooms, in moments of transition, in moments of reflection. It follows humans into love, into loss, into creativity, into belief, into the deepest questions they ask themselves late at night when the world grows still. And yet, because of everything it has shaped, loneliness is no longer only a wound, it is also a signal. A reminder, a guide. It reminds humans that connection is precious, that presence matters, that inner worlds exist, that meaning is made, not found, that to be human is to live between separation and togetherness, never fully alone, never fully merged, always reaching, always remembering. The first human who ever felt loneliness could not have known any of this. They could not have imagined the vast inner landscapes that would grow from that quiet night alone beneath the stars. They could not have known that their ache would become the foundation of art, music, story, ritual, morality, love, identity, and legacy. They only knew that something was missing, and that knowledge changed everything. It still does. Every time you feel lonely, you are touching something ancient, something shared, something that has shaped humanity from the inside out. You are not failing. You are participating in a long human story, one that began when awareness turned inward. One that continues every time someone reaches out, creates meaning, remembers, or simply sits with another in silence. As you rest now, let that knowledge settle. Loneliness does not mean you are disconnected from humanity. It means you are deeply connected to it. And before we part, if this quiet journey through the human past resonated with you, if it brought you a sense of calm, reflection, or understanding, consider subscribing to the channel so you can continue exploring these stories together. Feel free to leave a comment as well and let us know where in the world you're listening from tonight. Wherever you are, thank you for being here and rest well.